Whoop, whoop.
Hey, there you go, Nick. I'm rubbing off on you a little bit.
I got to keep the very specific ways of saying hello that are unique to each of us.
I know, right?
Going. So
you usually always start yours out with a grunt or because you have to sit down.
Whenever I have to sit down, try to get as comfortable. Try to look the least awkward on camera. That's the goal.
Right. I've just since given up. I will always look awkward on camera, and you just resign yourself to the fate and pray that God works through your weaknesses.
Anyways, that's we got a lot going on here at the beginning, but welcome to any of you that are tuning in or that may be watching this sometime later. This is the Wayfarers Christian Church Deep Dive. This is our opportunity to go a little bit deeper on some of the topics that we introduced in the sermon without having to include it in the middle of the sermon and make it like a super long 3-hour sermon, because nobody wants that. So the cool stuff that maybe had to get dropped out of the sermon, we include it here, where we can go a little bit deeper with some of y'all. So for those of you that don't know us, my name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor here at Wayfarers, and I'm here with Noah Randolph, our teaching pastor. Noah got to preach this last Sunday. It was an incredible sermon, and we're going to be unpacking that a little bit today. But before we get into that, we lately have been taking a little bit of time at the beginning just to hopefully get to know each other a little bit better and help y'all get to know us a little bit better as well. We've just been doing different icebreaker questions to kind of get to know each other a little bit. So do you have one? Do you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I got one. I
Okay.
came up with
what
it pretty
you got?
quickly. But
What you got?
All right. So today, if someone were to gift you with a day entirely to yourself, and the only stipulation is you cannot work, what would you do with the day?
That is an interesting question. Depends on what you define as work.
Yeah, okay. You cannot do anything for the jobs that you currently do, right?
Okay.
So you can work around the house, like,
Right.
like if you wanted to, like, mow the yard or something like that.
Yeah.
But, like, basically nothing that would earn you money or anything for
Okay.
any type of thing
Okay.
with Wayfarers or whatever.
Perfect. I think, like you're saying, just ideally, what would I love to do the most? What would be
Like, just say tomorrow, like, basically I told you, hey, don't come into work.
Yep.
You're like, I'm doing everything you do tomorrow.
Yep.
You just have a free day. What
Yep.
would you do?
If we were going to do this tomorrow, I always like working with my hands on days off. So I like mowing the grass or different things like that. But I only like doing that if I can also listen to a podcast or something else that I'm listening to, while I'm doing it. Because then I feel really accomplished by the end of the day. I can point to something that I worked with my hands, but I also can be
So would you sleep
listening
in?
to something. I would definitely sleep in.
You'd sleep in?
I would sleep in. I'd get up a little bit later. Currently, I've got a guitar that's kind of like we changed up the set a little bit today, so we got these guitars back here. This yellow one right here, this kind of butterscotch one, is a guitar that I built, I guess. I put it together from different parts. I bought all the parts, put it together. So I've got a few parts at home for another guitar that I'm building that has just been sitting in my garage for forever. And so I think ideally I would find a good NBA podcast, listen to some people talk about how the NBA finals went that start tonight, and finish working on that, putting that guitar together, putting the pieces of that guitar together. That is what I would do.
That's nice.
Yeah. What about you, Noah? What would you do on your day off?
I definitely would sleep in really late because I normally do that. And I would wake up and I'd probably clean house because that's generally what I do when I wake up is I want to feel like I did something useful before anything else. And so I'll, clean house and do all that kind of thing. And then once all that's done and everything's kind of ordered in the right way, It'll kind of be based off of my mood, actually, because I'm a very mood day planner. And so if I'm in a mood where I'm super productive, then I'll like organize the entire house. Maybe I'll switch a room around. Maybe I'll vacuum, I'll clean, I'll do whatever I want to do if I'm really in a productive mood. If I'm not in a productive mood, if I'm like more in just kind of blah mood, what I'll do is I'll probably find a book that I am in the mood for, and I'll pick that up and I'll put some music on. I have a really nice sound studio, and I'll play some music and just read my book for a little bit. And if I'm kind of in a social mood, like I just have the itch to be around people, I'll go to a coffee shop and I'll like just read or write on my computer at a coffee shop and do something like that. But I'll do all that in the morning, and then by the time night rolls around, night's like my chill, rewind, relax time. And nighttime I'll usually be I usually go on a walk with my dog. I love going on walks with my dog late at night, and I'll listen to a podcast generally then. That's where I get all my podcast listening stuff into. And I'll go listen through a lot of YouTube videos and things at night too. So, yeah.
No, that sounds great. I think those are both, I don't know, I'm a little biased. I think those both sound like fun days.
Yeah, yeah.
That sounds cool. All right, here's what I got for you. Mine is not nearly as introspective, but I'm curious. What is the craziest thing that you ever did on a dare?
I'm the worst person to ask this. I had this like mental, what's the word? I guess it's just pride. I just had this pride of like people making me do things.
And so you were like not going to do it.
And so I was not going to do it if it was a dare. Like I just like, I despise dares because it's like, oh, you got to do it. And I was always this type of person that was like, no, you don't. And so
you've never done anything on a dare?
I don't think I have. No,
yeah?
I don't think that I ever have given into that. I had people that like would be like, oh, we've got to do this,
right.
But like, and I'd go along with whatever they wanted to do. But like, I don't think I've ever had a situation where someone like dared me to do something. Now, if it was something that someone like thought was gross or something like that, I'd do it just to make them uncomfortable. But like I'd never, like, generally they didn't want me to do it, and if they didn't want me to do it, then I would do it. So I was very contrarian as a kid. So
I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel you.
Dude,
I feel like we're getting a good idea of what your
what about you?
Personality is like.
Did anyone dare you for anything?
Yeah, no, I was much more susceptible to peer pressure than you, it sounds like.
I mean, it's why I was lonely as a kid, but
I think I'm trying to think. I think the craziest thing I remember doing was in like youth group. My youth group used to take these trips in the summers to like different camps and stuff like that. And one time I was part of a group where we were staying in like in a dorm.
Yeah.
At a campus, at like a college campus, and we were on the second floor. Or we were on the third floor, and the guys on the second floor were from another church. It was another group of guys, and they were like, I don't know, the worst. They had just been like messing with us, playing pranks on us and all this kind of stuff. And at one point, all the guys from the third floor, from my youth group, decided we were all going to get together and go like just go downstairs, and we had like water balloons and like crazy gross flower bombs and like all kinds of we were just going to destroy their floor, basically destroy the second floor. And I was too much of a good kid to want to do that, but they were basically like, no, you got to do it. We dare you to do it. And so I had to like jump in with them and attack this other group of unsuspecting high school and middle school boys. And it was a whole crazy thing because our youth minister like jumped in, as youth ministers are wont to do, and he he participated with us in attacking the other groups. And in the process of like our crazy attack on the second floor, Some of the other guys came out with like rat tails, like towels that they had like wet, and they were like
Yes.
trying to slap all of us as we were running
Yes.
through. And they totally grabbed my friend, one of my friends, like the rat tail wrapped around his leg and like made him bleed, like actually like cut.
What?
Uh,
I didn't know they could do that.
Oh, I didn't either. It was very intense. He got him hard, and yeah, that all the fun was gone almost immediately at that
Oh
point. As
my
he's just
goodness.
like bleeding from his leg. It was like crazy. So I immediately regretted giving into that dare, but I did do that one time. So that's probably. I'm sure there's a crazier one, but that's the one that immediately came to mind.
Huh.
So either way, you kind of hinted at it a little bit here a second ago, but you said you were
A
lonely kid growing up. Today we are talking about something a little bit more serious of a topic, but I don't want to short sell it. This is we're going to be talking about depression a little bit and struggling with depression. You hinted at it a little bit in your sermon, Noah.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about we've been going through Genesis, looking at the beginning of Genesis, and you talked about darkness and light, and the fact that there is a role that God uses with the darkness. There's something he can do with that. And one of those areas of darkness that a lot of people seem to experience sometimes is depression. It's something that comes up a lot in a lot of people's experiences. And me and you have both noticed that that's something that churches don't talk about a lot.
Yeah.
In a lot of churches, it's not a topic that comes up. You kind of mentioned in your sermon itself that darkness in general gets avoided and ignored in a lot of church experiences. And so I definitely don't want to make it sound like, oh no, we got to talk about depression today, because I think it's actually a good thing to talk about. I think it's actually something that is helpful. So all I'm saying is I'm not trying to pivot to like, now that all the happy stuff is over, we're going to talk about depression. But that is the topic today. That is what we are going to be talking about. And it's an interesting one. Noah, you and I we've had a lot of conversations in our office here a little bit, just as we've been sitting talking about this topic. I personally have not had a lot of experience with that. I've had a lot of experience with anxiety. We've talked about that a lot, which is clinically they say the two are very related. A lot of people who struggle with anxiety also struggle with depression, and when they give you medication for it, it's a lot of the same medications.
Interesting.
If you take anxiety meds are a lot of the same ones as depression medications.
Yeah.
So they're similar in some ways, and most people who have one have the other. But I'm one of the like
rare ones,
pure anxiety cases. I'm just a ball of anxiety without the usual accompaniment of depression. But you have told me in the past that you had a lot of more personal experience with depression.
Yeah.
Have you had experience with anxiety, or has it been the opposite for you?
I am realizing really just this year that I also struggle a lot with anxiety.
Right.
And I think I had always just thought of all those feelings as just natural and not really any type of like thing that you could classify under that name.
Right.
So yeah, that's been a recent realization, is that not only do I have tendencies towards depression, but I also struggle with anxiety as well. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. So we've had experiences with both of them a little bit, but like I said, I don't remember having a ton of experiences with depression. I've had a few run-ins with it, but not a lot of personal experiences. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your personal experiences were with it, Noah? However you want to take it. Like, what was kind of your personal experience with depression?
Yeah, so I was a lot like you growing up, in that I was like a pretty good kid, you know, and I was always following the rules and always trying to earn the favor of other people as a kid. And I remember in high school, we switched churches when I was in middle school, and I was known as like the Bible kid at the church I grew up at. And switching churches when I turned a teenager was a little difficult for me. Like, it was entirely new group of people, new relationships, everybody that I had known and like had grown up with as a kid. Literally, I was born into that church that I left. So it was 12 years of my life, and all these relationships just gone. And so moving to this new church, I had a hard time at first, really like fitting in. And
how old were you? You said
12.
About 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
And but once I hit 13 and was in the youth group, I just kind of fell into my natural role that I'd fallen into with my old church, which is to be the Bible kid.
You were the Bible guy.
Yeah, and like no one there really had ever read any of the books that I loved, which was like First and Second Kings and Judges and First and Second Samuel, and those were my wheelhouse. I probably I had not touched a book of Paul at that point, but I had read Acts and I had read all of those books,
those Old Testament books.
Yeah, and I knew them by heart. Like I knew all the stories, and I loved those stories. And so there was just a lot of times that I was also into Calvinism because my dad was into Calvinism. And so I was always pushing people with passages that my dad would reference to become a Calvinist at 12. So yeah, it was just a growing experience of me being in this new space, being this Bible kid. And somewhere along the line, at that point, I thought I was all that. Like I thought that I was like a good kid, and I thought that everybody liked me. And I had a couple of experiences around 14, 15 that impacted me so much that I became convinced that I was not the center of everybody's universe, but that I was actually quite annoying to most people. And so I was actually at VMI. I've told you this story.
Yeah.
Nick and I both met each other at a visible music camp for a week.
We were both interested in going to a Christian music school here in Memphis called Visible School. And you were taking lessons at the time from drum lessons from a guy that was a professor at the school.
Yeah.
I had just graduated high school, and I was hoping to go to school there. But when I applied for the school, I did not know enough music theory to get in. So they were like, hey, your skill level is good, but you got to get your music theory up much higher. So they offered me this chance to go to this summer camp called VMI, where I would get to learn a little bit more music theory and be in a better position when I went to school there, theoretically. So that's why I was there, and you were just there to hang out at the summer camp and be a part
and
of
I
the
was
music
also
experience.
thinking about going to the school. Like I was looking there, and Dave, who was my drum teacher at the time, had pushed me to like try and get more community with kids and stuff.
Right.
And so I was there for him, and the first hard lesson I learned was that I was the worst drummer I felt like there of anybody that was trying out. And to my credit, I was 15 and everybody else was like 17 and 18. So like I was young. And so it was an immediate like shock of like, I'm not the best at this. And I had been the best up until that point as a, just in my life. I'd always felt like I was the best. And so I felt oddly out of place. I remember you and I, the first time we sat down, y'all were talking about bands that I had never, ever.
Oh, yeah.
had
I was
any
hardcore
ideas.
in my like hipster phase where I only liked bands that no one had ever heard of. And
Yeah,
so
it was like Five Iron Frenzy and like.
We were listing a lot of bands that no one had ever heard of.
And I was over here like, I listened to K-Love. And like, I just
Yeah,
felt,
you told me you got stoked because I mentioned Switchfoot.
Yeah.
And you were like, I know that band.
Yeah, it was literally the only band I knew was Switchfoot. And I just was like, what world have I entered into? And it got worse because I found someone that I actually thought I jived with quite a bit, and I hung around her like the whole week. And at the end of the week, she very bluntly pulled me aside and told me that I had been annoying her the entire week, and that she had been trying not to like be in my presence as much as possible, and that I had just had this gift of finding her in places. So at the end of that week, that was sort of the shell shock. And then the week following, we actually went on a vacation up to Washington, D.C. And so I had that week I was at camp, and then the next week I was in Washington, D.C. So I basically had 2 weeks away from my church community and away from that youth group. And when I got back after those 2 weeks, like no one even knew I was gone. And it was this wake up moment for me where I realized that no one knew I existed, and I switched from being an extrovert to an introvert that day. Like I from that moment forward, I felt like I needed to test every friendship to see if I was even like if I was someone that annoyed them, or if they actually enjoyed my company. I ended up being that kid in corners as a result of that, and I really just kind of removed myself from the performer that I used to be. This kind of like Bible, and I even I stopped being as I used to always answer every Bible question, and I stopped answering Bible questions, and I kind of let other people answer the questions even if I had the answers, and I just didn't want to be a public figure anymore, basically.
Right.
And I really wanted to do that because I wanted people to want me, and so I wanted people to need me. And yeah, I think that was probably
so you felt like it was like a shell shock wake up call moment, where before that you felt pretty connected with the kids in your youth group. You felt like you were a pretty well liked guy.
I would say I was ignorant because I in some senses I definitely think that up until that point I had way too much of an ego, and I've always had to deal with a big ego. But I definitely would say up until that point I had not a single feeling of self-deprecation or depression, or
you were pretty confident.
I was pretty
yourself.
confident in myself. I thought I was all that, and up until that week at VMI,
where that girl you had been hanging out with, she said, "Hey, you're actually super annoying. I wish you would leave me alone."
Right.
And then on top of that, all your supposed friends in youth group kind of didn't.
Yeah, and it wasn't anything they ever said. It was her, the experience I had with her, coupled with being gone for 2 weeks and then coming back and being in this place where I was questioning all of my friendships, really.
Yeah. But nobody acted like they had missed you.
Yeah,
like that.
Exactly.
And so you feel like that's really interesting. Not a lot of people can point to a specific time when they feel like they noticed a change in their personality, but that was kind of the moment when you were like, that initial depression kind of reared its head for the first time.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And so that was when you were a teenager. Did it just kind of progressively build up from there, or how did it?
Yeah, so I definitely was struggling with it all the way through high school, and I was blessed to have a couple good friends during that period when I got a car at 17 that I just did everything with. And so that was cool. I always felt like I never felt like I had hit rock bottom in those kind of ways, because I did have two people that just wanted to spend time with me. But it was always in my mind, it was always like, I always felt like those were the only two people in youth group that I mattered to,
Right.
And girls was a big problem for me
Sure.
too, just like I because I have this performer mentality, I always wanted women's attention and validation. And so I just, my moods would swing based off of how much a female gave me attention,
Right.
And that's typical of a lot of teenagers,
right.
But still, I always felt like it was very aggressive even. And past high school, I kind of, my senior year of high school, I kind of just checked out of everything. I got kind of tired of all of the same questions, and I was getting to the point where I felt like I was on another level biblically than anybody else was at that youth group. And I was tired of them asking all of these politicized questions and all these types of things, and never really asking the questions I wanted to ask about these really deep topics, about theology and things like that. And so I was really frustrated that my voice was a really small minority in terms of what asking questions about the Bible and things. And so I really checked out the last year. And at the same time, I was also really self-conscious about my weight, and I've always been very self-conscious about my weight. And so I was going through that at the same time. I made a mental note never to go to a pool party again that last year, just because I was so self-conscious about my weight. And so I never, like the whole summer, that youth group, all they did was pool parties.
Right.
And I never went to a single one intentionally because of that.
Right.
And by the end, I basically lost pretty much any connection to that youth group, save those two friends.
Yeah.
And when I ended up at college, I moved from my house to downtown, and all of that community was in a very rural part of Fayette County. And so when I moved downtown, it was like a 40-minute drive back to my friends back there,
right,
back to that church. And I kept that up for like the first year. Like I tried to like
drive back home
and be involved there, but also be involved in this new college experience downtown. But just over time, that sort of just faded, and the distance, and I started sleeping in on Sundays, and so I stopped going to that church mainly just for sleep reasons. And that first year, and I'm homeschooled, so like a lot of people talk about how homeschoolers have a harder time adjusting to the real world when they first step out. Like they have a way more difficult time with that. And my first year was the worst in terms of depression. I think a lot because of that. Like
your first year in college.
Yeah, my first year in college.
Yeah.
Because up until that point, I had been in this bubble where everybody was a Christian.
Right.
And so you kind of had some similarities with anybody just based off of that. And past that, I was exposed to so many different people from different states. Visible actually pulls from a lot of different states. It's not very...
Yeah, all over the country.
Yeah, I think people that end up there that are from Memphis is like 10% of the student body.
So it wasn't just people from the South, wasn't just people from the Memphis area. You got exposed to a whole bunch of different people.
Yeah, and when I did that that first year, I was roommates with a kleptomaniac. I was roommates with someone that
define kleptomaniac.
Like stuff would go missing all
someone
the
who
time.
Steals stuff a lot. Addicted to stealing.
Yep.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Someone who you were saying, so kleptomaniac.
Yeah, and someone that was on a completely different sleep schedule than mine, where I stayed up late, they got up early, and
so you get just didn't cross paths.
Yeah, just didn't cross paths with them that much, and they were an extrovert and I was an introvert, and I just kind of became this sort of reclusive person this first year of college, and really just kind of kept to myself and tried to just ride out the year as much as I could. And at the same time, I had the same experience where that first year I was in drums, and I was probably the worst drummer of the five drummers that were in the freshman class that year. And so I was also having to deal with insecurities about being the worst drummer in my class. And I remember the first time I got a 70 on one of the things I did for drums. I just lost it. Like I cried and bawled, and I had built up in my mind so much this idea of me being a good, perfect, achieving personality type, and that first year just wrecked me in terms of who I was,
right.
Made me realize just, how inadequate I was at drums. And so I dealt with a lot of the feelings that first year of feeling like you're not worth anything, and that everything that you're doing is the least great in comparison to everybody else,
Right.
And learned that my social skills were not as good as I had thought.
Right.
And
that sounds like a fun time.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, like I can go on, but yeah, I that was the journey, and that ended. The first year ended with me actually landing in counseling. I got too specific about some of my darker thoughts with someone, and they called suicide prevention on me. So I went through that whole mess, and so I and it was really bad because it was not by not by like choice. It was all by like force of,
Right.
And so I had to really learn over the course of my life that this was a problem that I was going to have to deal with. I put my parents through hell that year, but it's something that I feel like I've always dealt with outside of the church. That's why I was talking about this in the sermon, is like it's something that you fix going to counseling and therapy.
Right.
And I don't know if I've ever sat down with any church leader, and really until you, and ever like talked about it out loud, and like talked about those struggles and what I went through and why I went through them the way I did.
Yeah.
And looking back now, like I can actually see like a shift, like I can see some of the choices that I made that led me to that place. And, I'm in a way more healthy space now than I was those years. But I think one of the main things I would say is that belief and want to have everybody validate you and want to put you up on this pedestal to be the perfect person, That was probably the main thing that I needed to shift in my mental life before I could really start
the main
to get
goal
healthy.
that you needed to
Yeah. It was like I think if anything you get today and my story means anything, is that I really truly believe that you've got to get out of your head that you need to be perfect for people to love you, and I think that's just bred into American culture. Like I just think, especially in homeschooling culture, I think there's this push for homeschoolers to be perfect because they're constantly with their parents and they're constantly trying to compare themselves to their parents' expectations and also their peers' expectations. And then when they get out into the real world, it's like, how do I fit with these people? And so you're constantly just thinking of, at least I was always constantly thinking of people and events as benchmarks and ways to like achieve X here, or and when you don't measure up, when you can't achieve X, it becomes really depressing. Like it becomes very hard for you not to become self-reflective and say, well, I'm not good at this because of me, and that can spiral downward and lead to some really dark places. So,
it can turn into a lot of different things. So that was kind of the journey that led you up. Would you say it got to its worst at that point? Like that was kind of the worst that you dealt with, and then you've had.
I would say it hit the peak at that first year at Visible. I got some really close friends the year after. My second year, I switched from drums to audio, and I ended up being way better at audio than I was drums. And so there was a lot of like, really just because I was better at it, my self-reflection was less critical. I actually ended up rooming with someone that I became best friends with, and I actually went up for his wedding a couple years ago, and was a groomsman and everything. So, I developed some good relationships. But Avenue also happened during that phase, and Avenue probably more than anything, I would say, shifted my perspective on depression. I would think that was the one place I felt like I could be myself in and not feel like I had to perform. And because of that, I think. Because when I first started going to Avenue, I was very much the reclusive person that would sit in corners and things like that and not really talk to people. And Becca was like the first person to really like, I talked to you and Nick every now and then when you were there, but Becca was like the first person that was like intentionally trying to pull me out of the corner and talk to me about coffee or whatever it was. And
so Avenue was the coffee shop that I helped start, that we both used to work at, and you felt like it was the first time that you got to be a part of a community where you could really be yourself without having that performative aspect of having to like live up to other people's expectations or what they wanted from you or all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you think that was really helpful in helping you
it was, and it was the first time I felt the desire for church to be like that. which is kind of why I preached the sermon the way I did, is I felt like the way that it was handled at Avenue was that there was less of this emphasis on finding like your niche or whatever and performing in that niche, and there was way more of an emphasis on, oh, you're here, let me let's just talk about life, and no topic is off limits even,
right.
And let's not try and make this small group talk or therapy talk. Let's just talk,
Right.
And I think that natural kind of feeling was something that I wasn't getting in churches, and it was probably the number one reason that I sort of began to have a way more healthier lifestyle.
That community and that acceptance that you were able to find in those groups.
Yeah.
So you're completely cured of depression. You've never had any issues ever since then. Community is the solution.
Yeah, community definitely helps, but I would say that like I'm miles from where I was, but I don't think that you'll ever overcome it entirely, and that's what I said in the sermon. Is I think you'll always be dealing with downs, but I do think that you learn your triggers over time, and many people that struggle with this will know what I'm talking about when I mean triggers. You'll learn that there are certain things in your life that trigger those moods and those downward spirals. And if you start to learn the triggers, it can help you deal with them better, because you can start to deal with those triggers. And so you can start asking questions. Well, why did I get in this mood because of this? I had I'll be honest, I had one last night with this whole political debacle, and like I just went into a really depressive mood after watching the presidential debate. And so you can go through that mood, and you have to deal with what you're feeling in that moment. And a lot of times that's people will vent on Facebook or whatever, and I don't think that's a very healthy way to go about it. But for me, what I'll usually do is I'll try and find some type of outlet that can help me progress. So what I'll do is I'll either like start cooking, I'll put on a podcast that gets me out of that headspace, I'll play video games, anything that I can do to sort of move me away from that sort of mood that I've got in. And then once I'm past that mood, what I'll do is I'll analyze, why did that put me in that spot, you know? And sometimes it's a really simple thing. Like last night, I think it's just that I was really grieved for how much dissension and animosity and how much was going on last night, and I'm very sensitive to other people's emotions and those emotions in conflict with one another. And so because I'm very sensitive to those things, it triggered that kind of episode in me. I don't think I'm ever going to like stop being triggered by that. Like I don't think that I'm ever going to be a person that's not sensitive to those types of situations and gets in these slumps because of it. I think that's just part of me having super high levels of empathy.
Right.
But I do think that you can, over time, develop ways to, like I was saying, overcome those and like work through those downs so that
the overall trajectory is one that's
and the idea is not that you're just trying to cut it off immediately. The idea is that you're trying to make it not extend further than it needs to. You know, like you're not trying to stay there. And so you need to go down, you need to feel those feelings. Usually I find the best way to feel those feelings is to have a friend, that you can vent to. And if you don't have a friend to vent to, then find some type of physical medium to kind of display your anger. This would actually really help me, as I believe that all of depression is really just repressed anger. I've heard that from a couple of counselors that have talked to me about this. The idea is that you're actually mad. You're actually passionate about something, and you feel like you can't
you're hopeless. You can't
yeah,
change
you feel
it.
like you're hopeless and you can't change it. And so what you do is then you just take all of that emotion that you feel and you direct it, instead of out towards the world, you direct it inward towards yourself.
Yeah.
And when you direct it towards yourself, you take the bullet.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that was really interesting to me when you first brought that up. And so the example you gave in the sermon was that life is a series of high points and low points.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is to not stay
Down or up.
Or
Well, yeah.
up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to go to the extremes, but you want your overall trajectory to be, up and to the right, they call it.
Right.
In the even if there's ups and downs, it's going ultimately in a direction upwards.
In the positive, yes. A gradual incline, basically.
And one of the problems you pointed out that I thought was really insightful was that if you don't allow yourself to go to the downs, if you're somebody who's overly optimistic, overly positive all the time, and you're like, no, you like get upset when you see yourself going into this downward spiral, and you try to like cut it off. You try to like, no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna beat it with positivity. I'm just gonna be ultra positive. I'm not gonna let myself feel sad right now. Lots of times that actually ends up sending you into into a longer or even worse depressive state eventually than if you just kind of accept it as a part of life.
Yeah. So if you think about it in terms of depression is really just another repressed emotion, right?
Right.
Then if you're repressing the repressed emotion, you're doubling the repressing that you're
Right.
doing. And
Which
so,
repressing is kind of like pushing it down,
Yeah,
pushing it away.
yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
feel it.
and so you're just asking for a volcano one day
Yep.
is the way I think of it. And
Yep.
usually when it comes to depression, that volcano happens in the way of really dark event at one point. And I've done that, like there are a lot of people that want you to be happy, and so they unintentionally encourage you
To repress your
repress your
sadness.
depression. Yeah. And nowhere was this more obvious than in churches, actually,
Right.
because like they had this view of wanting to be in joy and count
Right.
everything joy and working your way into a happy life and I'll just say this, the dream for every person in church is that you get married, that you have kids, that you get that white picket fence, and that like you get a
They
nice
lived
job.
happily ever after.
Yeah, and that you live happily ever after, and like you have kids that are really well behaved. They
Right.
have kids. Like it's a very romantic dream,
Right.
for what happiness means. And you go to church every Sunday, and you have a great church community. And so it can feel very alienating at times when you're not hitting specific benchmarks on that dream. Like, I'm still single, and I'm definitely not in that category of working in a middle class job.
Right.
And so it's those types of things where you kind of feel on the outside looking in a lot of times. And so when they're like, why aren't you happy and all this stuff, the thing you really want to say is, well, because I don't have the life you do,
Right.
and I don't know how to get the life you do.
Right.
But you can't say that because it's really, you're at the same time, you're trying to figure out whether or not you want the life that they live, because you see the problems at least I saw some of the problems they had. And it was one of those back and forth things where, do I even really want that kind of middle class life? And so I think a lot of times you're in this weird spot where the church can't really help a lot of the time, because they're living a life you're not living. And so since they're living a life you're not living, they can't really offer any advice to help you progress.
Right.
Because for them, knocking the box off of getting married, knocking the box off of getting a good job and things like that happen so easily for them.
Right.
And so, it's one of those weird things where a lot of small groups and things kind of just have to pray with you through it.
Right.
And they can't really offer you a lot of constructive help because they haven't been where you're at. And so a lot of times you become kind of an uncomfortable person in those, like you become an uncomfortable persona in those situations. And so their response is to try and get you to think about happier things.
Right. Right. And then that ends up just pushing down or repressing the repression, like you were saying before, which ends up not being particularly helpful. And so for all of those reasons, that's why both me and you have gotten to this point to where we do think it's important to express emotions, even the negative and sad ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's important not to push those down, not to repress those, both personally and in the church.
Yeah.
Personally, I didn't expect to have an experience to be able to put your sermon into action so quickly in my life. But when you came in earlier today, I was telling you I kind of had a down day yesterday. Again, somebody that does not go through the issues as much as I do, but yesterday I was pretty depressed for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of things related to getting this church off the ground. It's hard, man. It's hard to make it happen, and I was feeling sad. And I'm one of these people that's more likely to do what you said, more likely to just try to be extra positive and lean into happiness and talk about all that kind of stuff. And I decided to take your advice, and I was like, no, I'm going to let myself feel the feelings. And so I went and found some of my favorite sad songs from Switchfoot, interestingly enough, the band that I really like, that we both had talked about at VMI. And I just found myself playing some old sad Switchfoot songs that really gave me a way out of expressing that sadness that kind of I was feeling. And after doing that for a little while, I felt so much better on the other side of it, because I wasn't trying to push down that sadness, but I was just letting myself feel it.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the things you were hinting at when you see yourself going into one of these
Downs.
low points.
Mm-hmm.
Let yourself go there. Let yourself feel that. Don't just try to ignore those feelings, because that's not really helpful. That doesn't really get you forward. The other thing I think being upfront and honest about our feelings and letting ourselves feel those feelings can do is it gives room for the people in the church who have gone through it to let other people know that they went through it.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you were talking about singleness and how churches are always pushing married life, and they're always pushing that you need to be married, and you always kind of feel left out, because it's like, what does a married person have? Married person doesn't have very much good advice on how to be single,
right?
At that point. But I have had conversations with certain members of churches who were single a lot longer, who wanted to be married but had to wait till later in life till they got that point. And when those people have been honest to me about how hard that period was for them and how sad they were in those periods and how depressed they were about that reality, I found it to be really helpful for me. And my suspicion is if you heard people like that talking more often, that would be much more helpful to you than a young married guy being like, oh, you just need to do this, or you just need to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is allowing for the room to express those sadnesses helps other people who may be going through similar sadnesses feel a sense of solidarity. Feel a sense of like, me and you are in the same boat. We both felt these feelings before.
Yeah, and something I touched on in the sermon, I think the mentality a lot of times is in churches is you're here to be fixed, Right. Like let's try and figure out how to get you from here to here,
Right.
And when it comes to things like this, a lot of times you don't really want to be fixed. You want to exist in a space where you feel like you can express these feelings with someone that you trust,
right.
And you think about this happens all the time outside of the church, right? Where 9 times out of 10, if I'm calling a friend and we're talking through an emotional issue, I'm not asking them for advice on how to deal with this. I'm usually calling them to talk to someone, just to like get that off my chest,
Right.
And I don't know what it is, but in churches, it's like they completely don't think about that side of it. Like,
Mhm.
there's no space where you can just like talk and vent, you
Right.
know. And I really think it's what grows friendships a lot of the time, is because when you find you're in a space where you're comfortable with someone, where you can vent with them, and you don't feel like after you vent with them they're going to come up with a 5-point plan of how to fix whatever you just vented
All right, what's
about.
our action steps?
Yeah,
How are we going to get over this?
You know, when you just feel like you're giving this to them because you want to share part of your inner life with them, and you trust them enough to do that, there's this bond that forms doing that I really think is vital to community. I think that's what Paul means in Galatians 6:3, where he's saying share each other's burdens. I don't think he's meaning like, hey, every burden that you have, like, fix as soon as someone shares it, you know?
Right.
I think it's, you know, being able to hear another person's, you know, struggles with these things, and not, you know, a lot of the people that I grew up with would freak out when you would say these things. They'd be like, oh,
Right.
what did I do wrong, or something
Right.
like that, or you know, oh, I'm so sorry, and then they'd walk around eggshells around you afterwards, not trying to set you off.
Right.
And I wanted to tell those people, I was like, no, that's not the response I wanted from you
Yeah.
when I vented to you about
Yeah.
this emotion. I didn't want you to be like, oh no, like, you're suffering from this, oh no, I'll try and be better, and, you know, like, do this like super anxious kind of thing around you. Now it's no, I wanted you to hear this because this is what I'm going through, and I wanted you to just sit with me and give me a hug, and then we'll call it good. You know,
Right.
like there wasn't
You weren't calling them out on anything.
No,
You weren't wanting them to.
yeah.
You just wanted somebody to be able to share your burdens with you.
Yeah, exactly. And it was funny. A friend of mine, not in the church, told me something that I thought was really funny and true. Is sometimes you're just in moods where you get down, and all you need to do is eat a sandwich. Like, and it was really true. It's like there is sometimes you just get in these headspaces where you just need to vent, you just need to eat a sandwich, you need to go to bed, and the next day you're back up. And I think getting into this mentality where you're trying to fix every time you get in that phase just makes that worse later on. Whereas if you're like, I'm in a pretty bad mood today, I'm gonna, you know, eat something, or I'm gonna talk to a friend of mine, or
Right.
I'm gonna go to sleep. You know, those things are those things are meant to reset us. And I think that they've become super helpful for me in my later years, helping deal with those types of things. And it's just something I wish churches understood better. 9 times out of 10, like, Wednesday night church even was always a reset for a lot of people. I felt like it was a time where people, you know, because it used to be, at least my churches would do, where they would have food before the services, and, you know, you would eat for an hour before then going. And 9 times out of 10, you'd see people that come in super moody, you know?
Yeah.
They'd sit down, they'd eat for an hour, and then they go listen to the sermon, and that hour that they sat eating with someone changed their mood most of the time. Like, some just being on, you know, just eating with someone else in a shared space a lot of times would fix a lot of that stuff. So it's not one of those things where, like, you have to, like, pull out the book of psychology and like sweat bullets trying to figure out how to deal with depressed people in your community. A lot of times it's just be human, you know?
Right.
Just let people vent, and you know, give them hugs every once in a while. I think it's I think that's kind of the most important thing I wanted to get at, is like, and the other thing I touched on was that when you're in these, when you seem to struggle with sadness a lot more than most people, that's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, in the Beatitudes, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn,
Right.
for they'll be comforted." And so there's a whole line in Scripture that's dedicated to you, that if you're someone that has a tendency to mourn,
Jesus is saying
Jesus is
that's
saying
the
you're
kind
blessed.
of person I want. You're
Yeah,
blessed. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think a lot of these people that tend more towards happiness, they have something to offer too. But
Yeah.
I think that they need to learn from these, a lot of us that mourn more so than not, and they need to learn, why are we in the what grieves us? What is it about? Like I said, I think a lot of depression is related to high empathy levels, and empathy is actually a beautiful thing. Like I think empathy is something that helps you be able to understand different people's perspectives. And I would love it if I could have empathy and not have all these sad episodes, but that's just not the reality of it. And happy people that don't necessarily have as much of that that sight, that empathizing sight, can learn from people that do, and they can even develop their own empathy a little bit more, seeing people like that. So I think there's just a lot to this whole topic that and people that struggle with depression that is actually beautiful. And that was my main point at the end, was just some of the most beautiful people in my life have been people that have struggled with this, and I really do believe that.
So it seems like a big point of what we're trying to say here is it's not helpful to try to ignore your negative feelings.
No. Yeah.
Don't do that. It is helpful to express your sadnesses and your negative feelings. That's something that's important for a lot of people to do. People who are more likely to lean that direction have something that what they don't need from the church is they don't need you to try to fix them necessarily. Yeah. And in fact, a lot of those people have a very interesting and unique perspective that God can use that is useful in some ways to the church, and God blesses those kinds of people. He in a certain way, he sometimes prefers the people who are that way than the ones who aren't. And so for all of those reasons, we think that the church, all of them, we're going to try to do this with our church, but we think the church in general at large should try to do a better job of approaching these issues with some nuance and understanding that it's not just like this problem to be fixed, but that there is a lot that can go into it that takes a little bit more than that. And that's our desire as a church, and we hope that could be the desire of a lot of other people moving forward as well. Do you have anything else? Anything else you want to do before we finish up here?
No. I mean, I think I've said most of everything that I needed to, but if anyone's listening that struggles with this, no, you're not alone.
Definitely not.
And I've never been able to like fully say the whole story, out in public. So it was a pleasure to do that, and so yeah.
I'm glad you got a chance to. We've talked a little bit before. It's important for us as a church. We want to be transparent with people. We want to talk about our own personal struggles that we've gone through, and we want other people to get a little bit of our story. So hopefully this was a good opportunity for those of you that are watching live or watched later that got a chance to hear a little bit about that and hear some of the just beginnings of a direction that we found as we navigate that issue moving forward, something that is common in a lot of different churches. So I want to repeat the same invitation as usual. Definitely would invite you guys to watch our Sunday live streams as well. If you didn't get a chance to watch Noah's sermon that he's referencing, I would go to our YouTube channel. You can just find Wayfarers CC on YouTube. You'll be able to find Noah's sermon from last Sunday.
Light and Darkness.
Light and Darkness is the title. You'll hopefully be able to check that out, get some really cool context and some cool insight on those first few chapters of Genesis. And I would encourage you to just tune in with us this next Sunday. We're going to be doing it from a different location. We're going to be on site in Indiana at a camp, Wildfire Christian Camp. So we're going to be out in nature, getting a real cool new perspective on the live stream, something different than our standard in the chapel. And we're just going to be continuing through Genesis. So I would encourage all of you to tune in this Sunday at 7 o'clock. We hope to see you there.
Thanks, guys.